we'll start. Well, thank you everyone for attending. Hello everyone and welcome to the SEVI Research Talks. My name is Mona Abdel Samad and I'm the director of the Social and Economic Fundability Initiative, which we say SEVI. SEVI is an interdisciplinary initiative that focuses on researching and providing solutions to issues related to homelessness and housing. You could check our reports and I'll put a link to it in the chat on sevi.sdsu.edu. We have had several people do reports and I think they're great. Of course, I'm biased, but that's my take on it. Today, we have our colleague from the School of Journalism and Media Studies, Dr. Piri, who will present on homeless perspective in reframing problems and solutions. Dr. Piri's research was conducted in the Transitional Storage Center, and the research was supported by SEVI. The reason I mentioned that it was conducted in the Transitional Storage Center because it really highlights the issue of what it means to be liberated from your belonging. And so you're gonna see this come up in her research and her presentation. We have also, by the way, on SEVI, we have a link to her published article, which is a wonderful article that hopefully you will get a chance to read it as well. So with that, Dr. Piri, the floor is yours.
Wow. Thank you so much. I'm really delighted to see so many people willing to give up time in the middle of their work week to consider how we can improve the lives of some of society's most vulnerable individuals. It's really heartwarming. And I'd really like to thank Muna and all of the people who are responsible for the SEVI fellowships for centering this type of research and choosing in this particular series a mixture of projects that approach so many different aspects of homelessness. I think from this one and all the others that follow in the weeks that to come, they will really enhance our understanding and how we can potentially resolve some of the most important issues. I chose to focus on what individuals experiencing homelessness think about their circumstances and what they see as potential solutions. I feel there are so many housed people who want to help, but just don't know how. So by understanding exactly what the people experiencing homelessness consider their greatest obstacles and what they see as potential solutions, maybe we can reframe how we are seeing the problem and thereby reimagine those solutions to better suit the people in need. A little about myself. I'm a career visual journalist with 40 years working at different newspapers around the country. 20 of those were at the San Diego Union Tribune, focusing on social and environmental justice issues, mostly the border region and homelessness. So the folks in East Village and up in Hillcrest know me quite well. 3 years ago, I left the UT. The first thing I did was build a website that would help people experiencing homelessness tell their stories their way, hopefully allowing the surrounding housed community to see these unhoused neighbors as partners in a shared humanity. I teach photojournalism at SDSU's Journalism and Media Studies department, as was mentioned. I also teach visual critical ethnography at University of San Diego, and I teach digital journalism at City College. So I'm kind of all over the place, but really it's all about visual storytelling. When I went to get my doctorate in leadership studies at University of San Diego, my research focused on using visual storytelling to help us reimagine solutions-based approaches to homelessness. So it's all about this, right? So when I graduated this summer, I'm planning to devote my time to telling more stories on my website, talesofthestreet.com, and doing more research like the one I'm about to present to you here. So I'm going to grab the screen and start showing you, some of the work that I collected there at the Transitional Storage Center. So here we go. And feel free to drop questions into the Q&A or chat as Carmen is monitoring that for us. So here we go. I'm going to play from the start. Come now, there we go. And there are subtitles here. So I think it might help when I get into playing some of the video clips because some slur their words just a little bit. Right, so I titled this particular piece, Engaging the Perspectives of Homeless Individuals in Reframing Problems and Solutions. I did this because our attempts to improve the quality of life for the people who are living unsheltered are largely built on models that do not include their perspectives or their lived experiences. This leaves them feeling even further disenfranchised and marginalized. The objectives of the research were to elevate those narratives of those who are experiencing housing vulnerability into the collective social discourse on solutions. By understanding these insider perspectives, this is essential for informing our leadership theory and our practices in creating more meaningful solutions. And by presenting what participants identify as their primary concerns and their potential solutions to our community partners and local leaders, those who are entreated with caring for this population, hopefully we can all come to a more comprehensive understanding of the obstacles they face. So this particular study was built on previous research that I did at one of the other storage centers, the newer one, which found that when people were liberated from their belongings, there was a certain physical mobility that came about after they were able to secure their belongings in these free storage facilities that allowed them to make choices in their lives that could potentially impact their quality of life. They were able to make choices about where they would spend the day. Would they be doing research? Would they be looking for work? Would they be able to take their kid to childcare? Would they be able to take classes? Maybe sleep, you know? So these choices really had a big impact on their quality of life. Also, just as important was the psychological transformation that came from not looking homeless. This positively affected people's mental health, their self-esteem. This new presentability that they had in public not only changed the rest of society's pre-existing negative perceptions about homelessness and those individuals who found themselves vulnerable, but it also created a better internal sense of self-worth that transformed just how they felt about themselves and therefore how they carried themselves. It gave them a sense of purpose. So for the researchers out there, this is a qualitative study that employed an ethnographic approach to data collection. In other words, I just went to the storage center armed with bagels and donuts and plopped myself in a certain corner where I was out of the way and people would come and we would have open conversations. Also, I took copious notes about what I saw. I went at different times of day. I went on different days. I was there when it opened at 7 in the morning. I was there when it closed, just to get a variety of who was using these storage centers so I could get a well-rounded sense of the perspectives of different people. I used a constructivist grounded theory approach because that approach centers an understanding of the world from personal experiences and social contexts, and in the hopes of allowing us to better understand these abstracts of social processes and how we relate to each other over time. So the background on the Transitional Storage Center itself, it's a facility downtown in the East Village on 16th. It's operated by the Think Dignity nonprofit, which, congratulations, is celebrating its 15th year this year. The facility has 304 lockers, as well as 130 bins. So the lockers are, as you would imagine, like a high school or a middle school locker in the hallway that's tall and skinny and kind of deep. And the bins are literally brand new trash bins. I don't know how many gallons those are, but they are all stored in a row with locks and people can put their belongings in there. And they can access their belongings anytime during operating hours, whether it's in the morning, evening, whatever. People can drop their bedding in their bin at 7 in the morning and collect a hard hat and a vest and go to work. And then in the evening, do the reverse. So at this storage center, who I spoke with, I spoke to 20 individuals who are clients there. I also interviewed the manager. I interviewed the executive director from Think Dignity. 9 of the clients and 2 of the staff were video interviewed. 6 people consented to be photographed and 5 preferred to only be recorded with a handheld microphone. So the primary concerns that the participants identified, right? So I'm going to speak here about the obstacles and potential solutions. So to start with, these are the concerns, these are the obstacles that they identified. One is basic dignity. Again, being liberated from their possessions was seriously important. So when they are able to access the storage bins, they feel more respected. They feel like somebody who has a sense of personal dignity. Also, dignity includes, under the theme of dignity, hygiene, sleep, being treated as a co-equal member of society, being given the opportunity to advocate for themselves. The theme of presentability and how they look and how they're able to present themselves was huge for them, huge. I was really actually surprised how many people thought this was one of the key elements of concern for quality of life and how they were perceived, right? So the two go hand in hand. When they are denied the resources that allow them to be in control of how they look, right? They don't have clean clothes, they don't have access to a shower, they don't have a mirror to check out how they look, then that destroys their sense of worth. And then dehumanizing the homeless is sort of a broader concept, and some of it includes criminalization, right? So one of our other SEVI fellows will speak to you further along in this series more about the kind of laws and policies that directly affect the homeless. But a lot of that affects their psychological well-being as well. When it's illegal to spit, they can't sleep past a certain time of day, all of these laws that are specifically targeting the homeless, right? So dehumanizing them with these policies is one big thing. Also, they spoke about the fact that when they're carrying their belongings or they're pushing a cart, they are a magnet for the police. And that is something that, they're always looking over their shoulder because of that. And then channeling their skills into the workforce. So you'll hear in further into this presentation, some of the voices of the people that I spoke with talk about not having a car and therefore not getting to the temporary agencies as early as some of the other folks, and not being able to drive to a particular job site or drive for a job. I mean, it limits their ability to find good work, even though they have the skills. So that's a big deal for them. And then safeguarding, right? Being physically secure themselves as well as securing their belongings. If their home, their belongings is not safe, and they are constantly looking for that safe space, they feel like they're being gamed, right? So their belongings and their well-being is part of the game on the street, and that impacts their personal well-being and their freedom. So now I'm going to play some of those voices for you on these particular themes that I just mentioned, right? So right now we're going to talk about basic dignity.
I think what happens is when you think about homelessness, you think about that one bad experience of someone you saw on the street corner who is exhibiting symptoms of mental illness, but you don't recognize that that's a small percentage of that population, right? Of course, there are people that have mental illness, and of course, there are people that are suffering from substance abuse. But it's the same for our population in general. And I think we attach the negative stereotypes to folks experiencing homelessness because it's easier to justify not providing for them. If you look throughout history, you see that populations that have been marginalized and oppressed, they dehumanize them by demonizing them, right? And creating these narratives around who they are to justify the terrible way that they're treated and to justify not providing dignity and respect and justice for them.
All right, so then on the next theme that I mentioned, perception and presentability, there'll be a few of those.
No one wants a homeless person around because they don't know what the homeless person did to become homeless. Probably think they're lazy or who knows what, So they're all making up a million stories in their head about why you're out on the street with a bag on your back. And, I don't know. They treat you totally different though. Totally different.
And one more on that.
The shopping carts and the rent carts, Being homeless, I like to live like a homeless. I'm good, pretty clean, clean shaven, about my hygiene.
When you're carrying stuff like that, trying to get around, it's not only a burden, for the extra load. It seems like it's a magnet for the police to come mess with you. You can see that certain look that they give you, like you have something below the shoe,
And then this one was amazing to me. I really love talking to this gentleman. He talks about sleep deprivation and dehumanizing the homeless.
It's really hard to get a really good night's sleep when you're on the street, and the longer you're without a good night's sleep, the crazier you get. I mean, there's a lot of people out here who, they stand in the middle of the street and they talk to garbage cans, or there's people out here, they haven't gotten good sleep for months. It would be a good question to ask a doctor or a psychiatrist, that like what's the longest anybody's gone without REM sleep, and what was the repercussions of that?
Okay, so these individuals also identified solutions to those issues that I mentioned. So in basic dignity, providing places where people can change their clothes in privacy. A simple thing. We don't think about it, but I can't tell you how many times I have been driving around in Hillcrest and here's a woman who's changing her clothes in public because there's no place else for her to do it. And then perhaps mobile hygiene stations with showers. I know a lot of the churches and places that do have mobile shower units closed down during COVID, which just made things worse. And then access to fresh drinking water, right? So if anybody remembers Waterman Dave, he drove around all day and took gallons and jugs of water out of the trunk of his car and handed them out to people all day. But that's something that a lot of people don't realize, they don't have access to fresh drinking water. And then channeling their skills into a workforce. They talked about, perhaps creating a database. All of them carry cell phones. They are more than willing to go to their phone. That's all they do all day, is look for opportunities on their phone. So if there was a database that they could plug in their particular skills and say when they're available, what area of town they live in, they said maybe that would be a way to be able to marry someone who has a skill with a need or an opportunity. And then as far as the sleep deprivation, some of them said, what about creating zones where people could sleep at a particular park during certain parts of the day? If there's a guard there who was just monitoring people's belongings so that they weren't stolen, people would feel comfortable falling asleep, going into good deep sleep. Or with maybe partnering with certain motels downtown or SROs for 1 night or 2 night vouchers, instead of, just going full in for temporary supportive housing. Just a 1 or 2 night stay makes a big difference for some of these folks. And then as far as the decriminalization, eliminating certain tickets that specifically are targeting the homeless, like the encroachment tickets or spitting or loitering, and all of those kind of things that are designed to allow the police to ticket someone, and then like a host of tickets that pile up, and then you become negligent and you haven't met your court date because you can't afford it, and therefore you have a misdemeanor against you, right? So it's snowballs. And then safeguarding. So establishing this kind of facility in other neighborhoods. Now, I know that there is one up in City Heights, and from what I understand, it's doing really well. And several of them talked about creating more street lighting in certain areas. So as far as the solutions, here are some of those voices.
Well, of course, you want like housing. We basically will accept anything as long as as it's some type of housing. I'd rather work for it. I don't want to just get it free. I'd rather just work for it. And most people can work for it. And that's part of our problem. We can't get jobs because of certain qualifications. And right now I'm waiting for security. I do security. And so I'm waiting for that, to come in, my guard card. So I did that and I'm waiting for that. It takes a while for it to come in on that part. I don't really have an address, so that made it difficult trying to apply.
And as far as the workforce, Danny here is the manager at the TSC.
Once they get stories, oh my God, I've never seen so many changes, like a total change in their demeanor and even their goal. They just light up. I kept wondering why they're so excited when they get a story. And I realized that they're homeless. Say, I can go now, my mind now is on getting a job, trying to find me a place to stay, and I can think clear. And so many people come in and say they get jobs. Some are working part-time, and they come in, some working at like at the shipyard, they had to have specific uniforms like helmets and certain tools, and they keep them here. So in the mornings when they wake up, wherever they're sleeping at, they come in here and get their tools and go to work in the morning.
And then the same individual offered some ideas about the sleep deprivation issue.
You know, and any kind of supportive housing has to take that into account. If it doesn't, you know, giving somebody a key, a pat on the back, and some food stamps is not going to solve anything. I mean, you're taking a really damaged person and you're going to put them behind four walls. I mean,
Which makes a lot of sense right there. And as far as the safeguarding issue, feeling safe.
It made me feel better about myself, but I'm not pushing everything around. And I got in a safe place that won't get stolen. Now I want a house for me and my dogs to live in and be comfortable, you know? And probably, because I'm waiting for my SSI too. So I'll get my SSI and probably do a little bit of work. Yeah, I like cleaning people's houses. Yeah, I like senior citizens too.
So some of the recommendations that came out of this, basically summarizing and encapsulating some of the ideas that came from the individuals that I interviewed, as far as basic dignity, the freedom to participate in self-determination, respecting their right to advocate on their own behalf in the larger conversation, maybe inviting some more of them into some of those policy discussions and designing programs, better access to hygiene, hand washing stations, showers, laundry, being treated as a co-equal member of society, for instance, and working to change the public perception, the public narrative about homeless individuals, which is no easy task, right? So there's nobody who assumes that that's an easy hill to climb. And then as far as sleep deprivation, just an awareness on the part of the police and the healthcare workers and outreach workers about the effects of sleep deprivation, right? So he talked about just the impact on someone's mental well-being and what that means when somebody is so fragile. Having this be part of a conversation in seeking solutions. As far as channeling skills into the workforce, maybe creating those databases. I don't know who would be in charge of that, but that was a suggestion from several people. So that people who want to work and have particular skills can find that, find that position that works for them. And give them a paycheck, gives them an opportunity to feel like they're worth something in our society and that they're doing their fair share and they're not just freeloading. And then more storage facilities, right? So the freedom that they talk about for being liberated from carrying their possessions around gives them the opportunity to look for work, to attend classes, to go to their medical appointments, and from the be free from the psychological oppression of looking homeless. So if you do want to read further about this particular study, this, as was mentioned, is published already. It's in the Journal of Poverty. So this is that article, if you wanted to go there. And then if you wanted to look for some of the stories that I've collected on the streets over the past couple of years, the website is called talesofthestreet.com. And there's plenty of amazing folks out there to read about. So, and then of course, here's a link to the SEVI site. And I will turn the screen back to Muna.
Thank you, Peggy. This was wonderful. For everyone, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the Q&A. I think we don't, so anything we can start answering there. So we have a first question. I don't know if you have seen it, Peggy, it's from Jennifer Handy. And she said, have you looked at what other cities or countries are doing that have solved their homelessness issues? And just curious what they are doing that we are not doing or we have not implemented.
Right, so that's a fabulous question, and I applaud you for looking to other examples, what other municipalities have tried and done. Obviously, different cities, different places have different relationships with community activists or nonprofits and who they entrust with taking the lead on solutions. I'm really impressed with what some cities in Canada have done that create very specific housing opportunities that center identity, right? So there are some, for instance, that have Indigenous folks running the center, and it's for Indigenous people who might be living on the street. So they feel comfortable talking about maybe some cultural issues. They know those folks understand their historical, cultural backgrounds. And they just feel more at ease. And that is also true for a lot of LGBTQ centers. I think San Diego for a while, I'm not sure how it is right now, but was doing really well with creating centers for youth on the street and finding them housing with other youth. I was talking to a gentleman today downtown who was telling me about an experience that wasn't so good at Vinny's, actually, to name names. And so this was in the past, so not like this year, but he, being a veteran, he was given the opportunity to live in one of the apartments. Instead of the large community room, he was given a place where he would share with a roommate. But his roommate that they gave him is someone who, let's see, how did he describe this person? He said, they have these rooms specifically for people who are veterans and people who have HIV/AIDS. So he was given a roommate who has HIV/AIDS, who identifies as a woman and is transitioning. So he felt really, really uncomfortable with this person as a roommate. And so that's the kind of situation that, as I mentioned, like those cities in Canada were trying to alleviate that kind of mismatching that forced somebody to just go, oh, no, I'm going back to the street because obviously nobody's listening to me. So, excuse me, that was one example that stood out for me. But again, that's Canada. I know Los Angeles had a couple of pilot programs where like housing facilities were run by homeless individuals. And I don't know, like the first couple of years went really well. But I think some people started bringing too much alcohol, too many drugs in, and they had to shut it down. So there have been a lot of experiments going on, and yeah.
Wonderful. We have another question as well from Suzanne Chasang. I hope I'm not butchering your name. And it is, what are your views on the housing first philosophy?
You know, I have asked that of many people on the street here, and I get mixed responses. Some people, as you probably heard from some of those individuals in this piece, like, yes, just put me indoors. Other people who feel real comfortable on the street are like, I just want a job. I want to determine what I do with my money. A lot of the stuff that comes up with housing first is that the money that they make doing whatever job gets siphoned off to pay part of their rent. And so people feel like they're being compromised. They're finally in a position where they can make some money, and the people who are giving them housing want it. So they would rather work and live wherever they choose, even if it's the street, than have a housing situation where they have to give up some of whatever money they have coming in, whether it's SSI, SDI, a VASH program, voucher. They don't want to give that money up. even though like it's for a good cause, right? It's for housing. But they feel, I have spoken to people, I won't say everyone, who feel they would rather live on the street and have a job first than housing first. If you have, for instance, a family, they will do anything to get their children indoors. So housing first for that particular clientele. And I see people in wheelchairs who are directly wheeling like 3 blocks away from a hospital with the hospital bracelet still on them. They won't take housing because they know there are too many rules and they don't want to have to abide by the rules.
Just to follow up a little bit on this question, do you think the ability to say yes or no is also linked to what you were talking about, this deprivation of self-determination? Like when you're on the street, you don't have a lot of things that you can control. You can control yourself, but you're not allowed to control, for example, where you sleep, where you sit, where you use the bathroom, all of these basic needs that we have. You don't have any control of it. And do you think like the idea to be able to say yes or no to something is related also to this idea about self-determination and having independence?
Oh, completely. Yeah, I think that's a really excellent point too, because that kind of speaks to the psychological well-being of things. A lot of people find a really good place to hide their stuff so that they can go out and wander around and do whatever they need to for the day. And when they come back and that bundle of things is gone, they have to spend all this time searching for replacements, right? But if they feel like they can go out and make those choices about where they spend the day without worrying about that stuff, hence the incredible value of the storage center. If they can go out and make those choices, they're a whole person. So a lot of people are not allowed into the public library pushing a cart. They've lost that ability to make that self-determination of what they do, make a choice of what they do that day. They would really like to go into the library and watch scary movies because it's Halloween, or get on Facebook and communicate with a relative who's in another state and check up on family who, because of COVID, they aren't able to visit face-to-face. Some of them, well, yeah, there's a lot of things that go along with that. But yeah, the ability to choose is huge. And so some of them, well, one of them was telling me today, he said that most homeless, and this is a slight detour from your question, but he was saying most homeless people don't start out that way. They aren't born homeless. Maybe they lost a job, they lost an apartment, they got divorced, and so they lost their ability to support themselves. And so, you know, the obvious phrase that we hear so much, you know, so many people are just one paycheck away from that similar circumstance. And we see a lot of people falling into that now that the moratorium on evictions is lifted and we start seeing more people out on the streets. But he says most people, when they're out there, they came out sober and they quickly find a way to cope with being homeless. So then they start drinking, they start doing meth, they start smoking weed, and that just consumes their day. So he says that he wishes that the people in the apartments around downtown would realize that there, but for the grace of God, go them. And they're not really deranged. They just had some bad luck. Yeah,
no, it's a trauma. Becky, I have a question if you don't mind. And you were discussing like the need to incorporate individuals who are currently who are unhoused in the decision-making process of whether it's decision-making process, what programs or how the programs are designed and all those elements. And I was thinking, what factors are hindering this participation? Like, what do you think are these obstacles to this participation? Is it just that whether it's researchers, whether it is decision makers, whether it's politicians, whether it is institutions that are helping them are not reaching out, or are there other reasons that are affecting this participation?
Oh, there's so many factors that affect that. And you hit on a couple of them. I don't want to denigrate any of the institutions that we have here in San Diego, because I think so many of them are really, really trying. Once you get into sort of a rigid framework of how your organization operates, it's hard to deviate. And you will have a lot of homeless pointing out that if, for instance, everybody became housed and we no longer had a huge homeless program or problem, a lot of those people would be out of jobs. So they're like, it's in their best interest to keep us wanting that program. Right? So that means that those people still have jobs and they keep us coming. The program only lasts 2 years. So then you go back on the street and then you come back for another 2 years, or somebody comes. So that keeps that particular program funded. So I think there's a little bit of bitterness on the street about that model. But if perhaps there were some open-minded folks who sought out folks who are homeless and who are well-spoken, right? You do need people who think about all of the looking for solutions, right? These are people who aren't necessarily selfishly saying, help me, but who said, let's come up with a better way to help all the other people. Now, a lot of the problem is that everybody out on the street is a unique individual. And so having a one-size-fits-all model doesn't work. But it's hard to devise a program or even a policy with that in mind. How do you come up with a policy about no loitering, except for this guy, right? Except for this person who promised he'd sweep up after himself after he puts his bedding together and walks away. So when the police have this particular, no, you can't be on the street after 5 a.m. policy, and you see all these people, you have to ask everyone to leave. So the voices of the homeless who are saying, you know what, we're exhausted. And if you just let us sleep 1 more hour or hour and a half, if somehow we can get that person, not just to stand in front of a microphone at city council and say, please help us by letting us sleep an extra hour, but invite that person in to whoever on the city council, whichever homeless task force program is coming up with these regulations, and say, what do you think? Bring some of those people in. There's sort of a ready mix of advocates there at the Living Waters Church on the corner of 16th and can't remember Island, where they have the choir, right? The Voices of Our City choir. A lot of those folks are pretty loud advocates and do go to city council meetings and do write letters. So I would just ask that maybe some of the programs invite some more homeless folk in that they don't necessarily already have access to. There are people who are formerly homeless on several boards, etc. But formerly homeless, like how long ago? And why not somebody who is currently homeless? So I would just advocate for that.
Yeah. And Jennifer Handy had an interesting kind of interjection, which she's saying, it's interesting that people think that way, meaning like how homeless individuals perceive a service provider. It takes a lot of work to get funding to keep the programs going. If the organization doesn't get the funding, the program goes away, and then there is no support for individual that is so desperately needed. Just an interesting perspective. And it is true, like, so there might be this perception as well, of course, but also these programs have to come, otherwise they wouldn't exist if these organizations don't get them.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. And I totally appreciate that comment from Jennifer, because again, you're talking to individuals who might have hit a brick wall and didn't get into a program, or maybe were in a program and felt that it wasn't for them and had to leave. So they're like, okay, well, now what? So I totally appreciate that comment, because there are so many hardworking people. I know a lot of hardworking people at Alpha and Path, et cetera, who are doing so much to try and reach out to people. And, I would love to be able to comment on rapid rehousing. I don't know enough about it. So I would love to have you, because I know people who've tried to get rapid rehousing and are on waiting list and years, and they'll go to an office and somebody will say, no, just fill out this form, come back. And then 2 years down the road, still not have housing. So I don't know who is on the list to be eligible and how, who is like elevated to the top and why and when. I don't know enough about it to be able to make sense of a good comment. So I wish I could. I wish I did understand it better.
Yeah. Based on what you're saying as well, there was a couple of things that came up through several research that is when homeless individuals sometimes are ready to be housed and they go to get housing or to ask for services, what ends up sometimes happening is there are certain programs, whether they are federal or state, that come with specific requirements. And so sometimes people don't fit those requirements. And so they end up not getting the service. And so that creates a little bit of also a view of how organization, like maybe a misconstructed perception of organization, but it's also an important thing, of course. But we also have another question. I don't know if you see it, Peggy, or if you would like me to go over it.
No, I see, to address the core cause of the homeless problem. I would be interested to hear what Crystal would define as the core cause of homelessness. Because I do feel that there are so many individual cases out there.
Mm-hmm. It seems to me, Crystal is hinting a little bit at, and I might be wrong, so Crystal, please correct us, at the cost of living in San Diego, which is basically the inability to be able to pay for rents, especially rents nowadays keep going up, and the cost of buying a house or an apartment keeps like skyrocketing. And so I assume she's approaching it from an economic perspective.
Yeah, thank you. I see that. I've done a couple of, I do a lot of freelance photography, and I did a piece with the Washington Post a couple of months ago about a woman who's been evicted 3 times, who lives in Imperial Beach, but because of the moratorium wasn't evicted, but obviously recently has been. And she's doing everything she possibly can to gather money to keep paying the landlord. And the landlord says, no, I want the full rent. I won't take a partial payment. I won't take a partial payment. So some of the problem is, and I really don't want to like say these people are villains, right? Because not everybody is the same. But some of the cases that landlords really don't want a certain clientele in their buildings. They feel like maybe having a person who is of low income will trash their beloved home or their apartments. So that it's not so much NIMBYism as it is people having a perception that someone who is currently homeless will destroy whatever apartment or room that they have access to. There's also I don't really feel comfortable speaking to the relationship that the city has with developers, but it would be nice to know that when the city asks developers or requires developers to have a certain percentage of new units be low income or quote unquote affordable, that they take into account our current wage to cost of living ratio. Right? So what does affordable mean? Do we have a definition of that everybody who's building new units is guided by? I don't know. And you hear rumors about somebody who's got a new apartment complex with quote unquote affordable housing, and it goes to maybe their in-laws or their daughter's friends who just graduated college, right? So we hear these kind of stories and we're like, how do you win? How do you win with that? A good suggestion from one of the folks I hang out with downtown said, you have all of this land next to the new trolley, and hopefully they're building new housing units next to the trolley because boom, you have mobility and you have affordability right there together. Somebody can get to school, get to work from their low income or their low cost housing unit. So I would encourage city leaders to kind of fast track any kind of construction permits in that regard, people building next to the trolley or a good bus line.
Wonderful. I think we have a question from Cassidy McCarthy, and it's about COVID-19.
Yeah, and the end of the moratorium. Have you seen a drastic increase in homelessness since the beginning of the pandemic? You know, the pandemic, believe it or not, I think that because of COVID, the city did an amazing job of getting people who are out on the street into temporary housing. I think what San Diego did was really noteworthy. There are a lot of people that I talked to on the street who were formerly homeless, who are in SROs or in motels or found rapid rehousing or found their way into temporary shelters because the city went out and found individuals and said, look, we need to put you into housing. It's not safe to be out here. And people went. So I'm really encouraged by that approach and how they just went and found people and said, look, I don't care about your background, your finances or whatever, we need to get you into shelter. And they did, and people went. Not everyone, right? But they made that serious emergency global pandemic effort. And then, okay, so I'm reading. And so more people, because of the pandemic, I would think that more people would be homeless because of having lost a job, if that's what you mean by because of the pandemic. I don't see, but then again, I see a lot more people living in their vehicles than I ever have. Mission Bay, Pacific Coast Highway, even La Jolla, the safe parking lots that are mostly operated by the Jewish Community Center, phenomenal, right? They're safe, they have guards, parking, water, restrooms, they're amazing. So I wish we had more of those. And then the federal and state governments have different definitions for homelessness. State of California considers couch surfing as homeless and the federal government does not. Yeah, I would personally consider couch surfing homelessness, right? You don't have your own domicile. You don't have a safe place that's your own, that you can kick everybody else out, close the door, stay for as long as you want. You know, I consider that couch surfing.
Yeah.
I heard of landlords who are incentivized by the city to house the homeless. I wish I had access to that information. I would really love to go down that road. Maybe if there's somebody here from the San Diego Regional Task Force for the Homeless or from a federal agency, housing agency, and have them answer that in the Q&A, that would be super.
Wonderful. I had a question, if you don't mind, which came to me. It seems that there is a narrative, there are stories that are really powerful in influencing how people perceive homeless individuals on the streets. And I was wondering, like, the power of these stories is that it creates a culture that reinforces itself. And my question is, how can we break out from these stories, from I'm pushing it a little bit by saying culture, but how do we get out of these stories that stereotype homeless individual of being unhoused with this image? How do you think we can get out of it? I know, for example, the work that you're doing, presenting stories, is a key component in shedding light on the real life of individuals who are unhoused. But I wonder if you can elaborate a little bit on this.
Oh, you're talking about my favorite subject. So yes, that's what I aim to do with the stories that I present. Basically not trying in any way to shape them. I just let them talk, and then I reiterate for them on their behalf how they would like to be presented, how they want their story to be known. So there's no real editing on my part. Just want to put that out there for those who go to Tales of the Street and read some of those. But it's a great question. We are such a visual society that we have the opportunity right now to utilize visual storytelling on our social media networks, on all kinds of platforms, at community meetings, on websites. You know, I talked to some folks who work with Councilman Sean Elo Rivera, who were like really enthusiastic about the concept of going out into the community and collecting stories from the people there in City Heights and posting them on their councilman's social media feed so that the community could meet their unhoused neighbors and see that they have a name and they have a history and maybe learn something about them. And by knowing that, next time you go out there and you see David on the street or Sherry, you would say, good morning, David. Good morning, Sherry. You would have that conversation. And there wouldn't be this wall of preconceived perceptions that keeps you from learning who they really are. And that's all it takes, is breaking down that barrier of, well, I have my idea of who that person is and why they're on the street. Like the gentleman said, right? These people are making up all kinds of things about what you did to become homeless, and they're going to stick to that, even though there's absolutely no founding in truth to any of what you just made up. So by putting the real stories out there, we can hopefully come to a better understanding of why are those people out there, and maybe you can do something about it. And that's the first step, right, is getting those real stories out there. So council folk who are willing to do that, to go out and send their staff into the community and gather those stories and share them and make them part of that community, make them part of that council person's district, and recognize them and honor them as real human beings with a voice and needs and goals, families. And then, for instance, I had created a different video and shared it with some people at the Interfaith Alliance up in North County. And Greg Angel, who's the executive director, wanted to use it as a training video for his staff and show it to his staff and say, well, you know, what do you learn from hearing this person's story? Did you know how hard it is for a diabetic to get insulin on the street and store it when you don't have a refrigerator? Is that something you ever thought about? No. So how is that going to help us with the clients who come to us with other health issues? Maybe now we're going to start asking them, oh, you're diabetic. Do you have a place to store your insulin? How can we help you with that? Oh, you don't have an address so that when you apply to be a security guard, maybe you can use an address here at our facility so that, you know, the regulating body who sends out those cards can send it here so you can get it. So knowing about these things and just the simple obstacles that keep people from taking that next step, right? So many of them take one step forward and they get thrown 2 steps back. If somebody steals their ID, you know how long it is to get a new replacement driver's license from the DMV when you don't have an address? That's a simple thing, but for them, it's everything. And just, I had a wonderful conversation with somebody who was part of Council President Jen Campbell's staff. And we talked about, he had this great vision of creating charging stations downtown so that homeless folk could charge their devices. So they don't have to go and find $2 so they could go in and buy a cup of coffee at a McDonald's so they could find a plug to plug in their phone. Right? So if there's a charging station that has Wi-Fi with a hotspot, these people can just sit there all day and charge their phone, charge their wheelchair, and be able to start moving in the direction of finding that home, finding that job, changing the narrative about what they're doing and who they are.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Petey. This was great. And I want to do one thing. I'm just gonna thank you for this great presentation. I want to thank also our graduate assistant Carmen Hernandez for helping with organizing all of this. She's amazing. And I want to also leave the last note to you. And once we're done, we can thank all of our participants, and then we can adjourn. I want to respect everyone's time. But so the last word is yours, please.
Oh, wow. Go out and say hello to somebody that you haven't said hello to, who's on the street, find out their name. And, you know, don't be in a hurry to walk away. That's just such a gift to so many people that you acknowledge them. I hear it all the time. We just wish people would say good morning when we say good morning instead of just walking on by.
Thank you, everyone. for all your presence, and please, if you can join us for the other lecture series that we're having, please go ahead and reserve, and we'll send you an email confirming your participation. We look forward to seeing all of you again. And thank you, Dr. Piri, thank you, Carmen, and thank you, everyone. And have a great night, and I wish you the best.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.